Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/finishthefight and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/finishthefight.
This is Spartan 117.
Anyone hear me? Over.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
Welcome back, everyone, to Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And before we get into today's episode, we actually had something really exciting happen earlier today, which is kind of a hidden message that was found in this year's Halo Infinite trailer. And I thought it was really cool. It's a really ominous kind of message, but it was found by Twitter user XEPYAL, however you pronounce that. Basically, it was whenever Chief's armor was booting up and a QR code pops up, but he actually had to look at it frame by frame and kind of crop it down. And what's within the QR code is a hidden message from Cortana. So we're actually going to play that for you right now and kind of let you guys listen to it, and then we'll kind of talk about it more.
This is part of me. I don't know why. I don't know how, but it is me.
So yeah, that was the message, and it's starting to kind of open up a floodgate of a lot of popular theories regarding why Cortana is evil in Halo 5, and they're talking about she has possibly the logic plague because at the end of Halo 2, we see that the Gravemind gets to have a conversation with her, and there are other stories about her, you know, and in this conversation, and also she can fragment herself. So another theory is that the Cortana that we see is like an evil fragment, because
it's even started in previous books that we've read.
Mm-hmm, yeah, we've already talked
back
about
in First
this.
Strike is already a piece where we're seeing her split her personality, and then you first start to see it in the game in 3.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. Like, I guess it's implied that there's a small fragment that's sending him messages and talking to him. And even in Reach, that part of Cortana that you have to escort back to the Pillar of Autumn is just a part of Cortana. And then we'll see it for sure, and it's very tangible in Halo 4 as well.
Yeah, that's when you're first starting to see it on screen, where she splits up into multiples, and you're actually seeing it split. But you're having in First Strike when Chief is on the ship and has to have multiple Cortanas doing things, and then her logic is that, okay, I need to split into more to handle these other things that are happening, which then splits into more to do this relay. And then you kind of see that with that, and then also with her coming up, on well over 7 years, seeing what she can kind of do to try and live forever.
Yeah, so that's kind of the theory, is whenever she breaks off into multiple Cortanas within Halo 4, one is kind of evil, one's kind of not. I know they also dive into her splitting off into fragments in the comic Tales from Slipspace, which is a good comic, by the way.
Yeah, and so to talk a little bit more, we do hear, besides her sending a message as kind of like, oh, it's part of me, we do hear footsteps. So it could be part of a cutscene. It could be a number of things. It's heavy footsteps. Is it a Spartan?
Yeah.
Is it a Brute? Is it a Forerunner? I mean, you don't really know what any of the tech is with it, so it'll be very exciting to kind of see how they decide to take that.
I know someone said, it might have been Halo Canon, that it kind of lines up with the ending of the Infinite trailer. So that's another theory. I think a lot of interesting things are going to come from this, along with people are going to be breaking down that trailer even more now than they already have. So hopefully we get one or two more really interesting things from this. Moving on now, let's talk about the topic at hand. Today's episode, we're going over Ghosts of Onyx. And this is one that people have been looking forward to for a while. I know whenever we posted about it today on Instagram, a lot of people had told us, like, this is the episode I'm looking forward to. So let's break down at least about the book. Ghosts of Onyx is the fourth book in the Halo universe, written by Eric Nylund and the first Halo novel to be released on Tor Books. Ghosts of Onyx was released October 31st, 2006 in the US and the UK.
And obviously we've seen Nylund before. Nylund wrote both First Strike and Fall of Reach, some of the first few books we read. And he's for my opinion, one of the better authors that Bungie's had with their books.
Yeah.
And just creates a really compelling story. We're going to see him a few more times in a couple stories coming up as well, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
So what he's done for Ghosts of Onyx really made an interesting, compelling story even more that with the way he writes it.
Yeah. So let's move into writing the book itself. Nylund was actually ready to write Ghost of Onyx, and Bungie was willing to let him write it, or basically write whatever story he wanted to, coming off of the success of Halo 2 or, the hype for Halo 2. They really needed something compelling afterwards to also bridge some gaps in between Combat Evolved 2 and 3. But Bungie, was like, okay, you can kind of write whatever you want. It just has to have some very specific story goals that Bungie had in mind.
And in an email interview with IGN, Nylund states, quote, Bungie asked me to meet with them last year to discuss the possibility of another Halo novel. I came in with here's how I see it. But then I got filled in on a few secrets and had to scrap those plans. Additionally, I was given some very specific goals to accomplish in this novel, more so than the other two, which is what you kind of brought up with.
Yeah.
Now that they have set story and set lore, you kind of got to follow that. And to finish it, I had an infinite amount of freedom as long as I could make the things they wanted to occur happen within the story, end quote.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think why this story is so dynamic and highly regarded is because they kind of just let Eric go wherever. Clearly, I think they had a few plot points that they wanted to do with Blue Team and whatnot, which we'll get into. But I think overall, just his ideas kind of really just went through the roof because he's been with Bungie since the Story Bible. Yep. So he's seen all of this unfold. And so having this opportunity to just really do whatever he wants, I think it was awesome. But in the past, Nylund was able to fudge some lore in his favor. A lot of aspects of Ghosts of Onyx was already made public, though, so he couldn't really change much of the story once it was made, once Bungie was like, this is what this book is going to be about. So that was kind of a roadblock there.
Yeah, and you could kind of see that in the IGN interview, because they have it broken down. It's obviously email, so they have it broken down into the interviewer questions and Nylund's responses, and they're pretty so what are you going to do with Dr. Halsey? What are you going to do with this thing? And he just comes back with these great quips. They ask, on the cover, it seems like there's a new gun and new armor. And then Nylund just comes back with this smart-ass response of so the gun, it's one where you pull a trigger and things come out and don't point it at yourself. And the armor, you wear it.
Yeah, well, there's always been not so much controversy, but the covers themselves, especially with the reprint of the first three books, aren't exactly canon. Clearly, we're seeing two generations of armor when they shouldn't be there. It's it's more just covers, at least within the Bungie era, are up to interpretation. I know with Contact Harvest, there was even some controversy of Johnson on the cover holding a BR, even though we weren't introduced to that until Halo 2. Yeah. So stuff like that people really take to heart when you got to realize it's Bungie's universe.
Yes.
If they want to say in this book, this is when this gun was first introduced and then change that, they really can.
Yeah, and you have to take cover art for a lot of times what it is. It's just a very interesting piece that tries to get the book to move off the shelf.
Yeah, well, even our episode covers, they're not always we're not doing this and being this is a canon image from this. It's just something interesting and up for interpretation. But yeah, so Nylund was given 15 weeks to write the book, but he claimed it still wasn't enough time, stating he lost sleep, ate too much chocolate, and drank too much coffee. I don't see the issue personally. Nylund would also express that writing the book universe had its ups and downs. In the same interview with IGN, Nylund states, "I don't look at it as writing a book in a video game universe. I look at it as writing for Halo, which for me transcends being just a great video game. It's evolving into a whole new mythology." He also stated, "It's better because I have all these great toys and characters to play with. It's not so good because I have to work and play well with other parts of intellectual property, so everything meshes." Tor Books editors were also given more time with Ghosts of Onyx to help iron out the plot and help make it less confusing and tangled as Nylund's other novels. I kind of know we talked about that in First Strike. It kind of jumps around, and sometimes some of the overly sci-fi stuff kind of gets out there. He kind of does that in this book as well. We'll talk about.
Yeah, he goes on some Nylund tangents for sure.
Yeah.
Which they do add an element to the book that is interesting. So if you do like space warfare, if you do like just general intricacies of whether it's the Covenant, the UNSC, or in this, as we discover, more the Sentinels, you kind of just get a little bit deeper detail of it.
Yeah. During the writing process, 2 chapters would be cut from the book due to pacing reasons, even though Nylund wants them to be released. You know, he wanted these 2 chapters to be released within the books. And I think there was a rumor out there of a reprint that was going to come out with those 2 chapters, but we have yet to see this reprint that he talked about early on. This book was also originally supposed to be called Ghosts of Coral, which I'm glad it's called Ghosts of Onyx. I think that's a lot more ominous. And
yeah, and it doesn't sound like Rick Grimes calling his kid. So
And something that we haven't talked about before is the illustration for the cover, because those first 3 were just, at least those original first 3 were like kind of in-game renders. The cover of this book was illustrated by Isaac Hannaford.
And I assume that probably helps when you switch from Del Rey to Tor. Probably you have different publishing contract. You probably have artists on staff certain areas, or however you do the contract for it. Probably help for it.
Yeah. Isaac had his art featured in the graphic novel our previous episode. So it was really cool to see that. And he's actually been doing a lot of covers and art for the Halo franchise for years. So it was really cool to see that and even see a pull-up of the original art that he did without the text or anything on it, which you can find, I think, if you just Google his name. So let's move on to the book itself.
The meat and potatoes, you might say.
The meat and potatoes of today's episode. It starts with a kind of the prologue is very devastating.
Yeah.
So it begins with 300 Spartan IIIs, a beta company, being deployed to a Covenant-controlled planet, Pegasi Delta. And this was in 2545. And
so 7 years prior to quote-unquote current events.
Yeah, and they had a mission to destroy these batteries, correct? And so it describes them battling all these Covenant forces. I think at one point they say thousands of jackals.
Yeah, because it's basically a Covenant shipyard. This is where they're building their cruisers, their battleships, everything with it. So by destroying these batteries, which are fueling those plasma engines, they pretty much render the planet null and void for the Covenant to even use.
Yeah, and it stuff like this is turning the tide of the war, because if these missions aren't being accomplished, then there's a possibility that Earth would have lost years before these quote-unquote current events.
And one of the big reasons that they were trying to take this down, not only is it a Covenant shipyard, so huge blow to the Covenant, it's knocking on the doorstep of UNSC-controlled space.
Yeah.
Which obviously is huge right there. And then you wouldn't want to see them basically create another armada that was wiped out previously, right then and there, to just right there at Earth again.
Yeah, and they kind of realize that something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, just 7 large Covenant cruisers come in. And I like that they talk about how they're like, we should have seen this because there's no way they would have been sent on this mission otherwise. But they were misidentified as stars at the time. So then they come into orbit, and it's basically just like this oh shit moment. At the end of the day, they do accomplish their mission. They destroy everything. And, Spartan IIIs, we're going to find out they're sent on suicide missions. They're supposed to be one and done. But 2 survive. Tom B292 and Lucy B091. They're only 12 years old that we find out. And it's really kind of traumatic that Lucy is like instantly like, we need to go find everyone. Like, we need to go find these people. And Tom's like, they're dead.
Yeah, because what happens is the reactors and everything in there explode. it basically just detonates that entire area.
Yeah.
And wipes it out. So just imagine an atom bomb dropping, wiping everything out, and they happen to get out of there. And yeah, so Lucy looks back and then protests, and you have Tom be like, there's no one left. We have to go.
Yeah.
And then when they get back, you eventually figure out when she goes through medbay that she can't speak. She goes mute because she was diagnosed with post-traumatic vocal disarticulation.
Yeah, which is, it's already like within this prologue is that she lost her friends and now she's just mute. So she can never talk again, which I think is just, and it's a very real sign of things that happen in war is what I think Eric really wants to do in this, is kind of like see, PTSD within soldiers.
And we talked about that in First Strike. He actually went back and met with soldiers and was like, what's wrong, with Halo? What's wrong in this book? Like, what can we figure out to make it as realistic as possible? And this is kind of like that. And you'll get to the end of the book, but what I love is the beginning and end of this book both kind of end in a tragedy, but also something comes out of it.
Yeah, like a small victory as well.
A little bit of victory. And so with the deaths of her companions from Team Foxtrot, which is the team that both Lucy and Tom were part of, we wrap up our quick prologue. And some of the things you want to take away from the prologue, we're changing up the podcast a little bit. I want to give you guys just a little bit more details, reviews of this, of really key things. Two big things stand out for me. One, we are now introduced to the spy armor.
Yeah.
Which gives you that full camo that you would get as an elite. So full blend mode, as some might say.
Blend mode,
as I make that up now. And and we also get introduced to Spartan IIIs.
Yeah, they were hinted at in First Strike very heavily. So now we actually get to see them full-fledged, and we're kind of already learning, we don't know much about them, but it's like, okay, Spartan IIIs can apparently be deployed at 12 years old, which is crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, and you're not just fighting rebels at 12. You're actually taking down an entire Covenant, basically Armada building center.
Yeah, which is, it's so terrifying to think of. And so now we go to Section 1, Ambrose. And now we're back to 2531. And we see some familiar faces. Blue team. So basically what they're doing is they're on the planet Victoria, and they're going to recover some nuclear warheads that are stolen by some insurrectionists. And I like that as they're kind of spying and killing people, we're introduced to Kurt, and he's part of the blue team along with Master Chief and Linda and Fred. And he mentions, he's like, something's off, because he looks at what the insurrectionists, like the kind of ammo they have, and they're like, it looks like they're trying to take out tanks, but he doesn't really think anything of it. He's like, something's off, but maybe it's just me.
Yeah, he's kind of the Spartan with the sixth sense type deal as they started out. Because it's interesting, because with blue team having a fifth member, he's the only new one that hasn't been part of this crew for so long. So what I love is, to kind of give you the Kurt backstory of it, you have Chief kind of talk about a little bit about, he's not one of the best out there, but he was one of the most sociable of the Spartans, which is an oddity because Spartans were always thought about like, pushing their emotions down, not really dealing with anyone outside of them, but he would jovial talk with captains and COs.
They said he tried to talk to everybody, within the team. So he always was trying to get to know people, which I think is really cool because we are starting to see a Spartan with a lot more emotion. Granted, we've seen that with the rest of Blue Team minus Chief, but having this guy that's probably one of the more human Spartans.
Yeah, and I think that helps with the intuition, is he can read people. So when he's like, why do they have that? Why are they acting like that way? Why are they supplying that type of ammo out there? But being the new guy is probably not wanting to offend, a CO that you're like, okay, I'll just let it sequester for now and we'll see if anything comes of it.
Yeah, and so basically all of a sudden Chief and the rest of Blue Team get passed out, or they pass out and they awake, and there's a General Howard Graves. And
Graves.
Yeah, and you find out this whole mission was set up to get them. And I like, as he's doing this monologue, he talks about the four of them. And so Chief's like, the four of us? He's like, oh shit, they don't have Kurt. And so within his kind of monologue, Kurt comes in and rescues all of them. And unfortunately within this, Graves is killed, which I think that Chief kind of notes that he's upset that Graves is killed, because he's like, he had a lot of information kind of turn the tide of this insurrection.
Yeah, to really understand that they knew about the Spartans. Like they knew how to do it because they also had these shock collars that rendered the armor useless. So you're just weighted down by like a ton of armor and you can't do anything. So basically they were at his whim. So he's like, I really wanted to pull some info and really figure out how did he know these things and who's spilling the beans on our missions. Yeah, but unfortunately he died within all of that. So Blue Team makes a heroic escape from this, as they always do. And I like that Master Chief instantly says, the next time you have one of these intuitions, like, tell me. Because now he's like, okay, this wasn't just some crazy thing. Like, you have an insight to this somehow. And one of my favorite quotes, which we'll hear again, maybe, possibly, she says to Kurt, welcome to Blue, Spartan. We're going to make a great team. Because looking back, Blue had always been this tight-knit unit, and Kurt was still kind of an outsider to them, and they kind of mentioned that he's fitting in, but he's the new guy. Yeah, he's kind of like that cool new guy that once he's with this like niche group, he's not the cool guy. So now he's the cool guy. Yeah, and they show like, you did what we couldn't do. Like you understood something, and you were the one to save us. Like, you're definitely family. Yeah, well, exactly, because I think of, like, if they didn't have Kurt to have realized all of that, like, what would have happened to them? Yeah, I mean, honestly, if it went the way it was, they probably would have all either been dead or, taken prisoner or whatever with that collar on. They can't do anything. Yeah, they can't do shit. So then the narrative moves on. And so now we see Ackerson. And I kind of like this because he's at, the Office of Naval Intelligence. We meet Rear Admiral Rich, Captain Gibson, and Vice Admiral Perengoski. And so I kind of like this because we've always seen Ackerson as this higher up, this evil kind of guy. But then we kind of start seeing a vulnerable Ackerson because he comes in and he's like kind of like almost you can feel the intimidation that like off these three people. So he decides, listen, I want to talk about the Spartans. And they're instantly like, we're not going to stop the Spartan II program. He's like, no, but check this out. They're expensive as hell, but they are useful. So how about we produce a lot more, but a lot cheaper? And so I think it's crazy to think that basically everyone else is on board with it. And the best part is like, they're going to make them disposable. And this is a secret within an organization full of secrets because they have to note, keep this away from Halsey. Like, because I think they mentioned at one point, like, if it wasn't for her success in this war, we would have, like, forced her to retire years ago. But they're like, we can't have Halsey know about this because she has so much sympathy with the Spartans already. So because this is a subsection of ONI, subsection 3, right? Yeah, a subsection within subsection. It's like the subsection of the CIA. Exactly. So it's crazy to think of all these secrets, but these are the heads of ONI. Like, these are the big bad. Ackerson also says that he needs a Spartan. So, and they're like, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. So thus it's kind of established like, okay. Another thing going back a little bit is that they talk about how this needs to be a secret. The Spartan II program was made public that way to boost morale. But this kid, like, we can't let people know that we're sending people on purpose to their death. Well, and it being the reason why it's allowed to be cheaper and they want to produce more units is they're lifting a lot of those guidelines they had for the original Spartan program. Yeah, because they're looking as well. They're not kidnapping children. They're going to look for orphans. Looking for orphans. They're not flash cloning, which apparently is very expensive, so they're not doing that. They're not dealing with any of that, and they're basically like, if they can fight, grab them. Yeah, essentially. Like, they still have some requirements, but at the end of the day, like, they're looking for orphans. I think it's established later on. They're looking for orphans whose parents were killed by the Covenant because they need that fire. That's going to be like a huge driver. And I believe that's a quote that he has. He's like, the one thing that, makes them different than Spartan IIs is going to be they have a purpose. Like, they have drive on why they're fighting this enemy, not just because they're told to, but because they have a vengeance to seek. They have like a personal vendetta. Yeah, and so, it's established, like Ackerson says, hey, I need a Spartan. They're like, okay, we'll get you a Spartan too. So then about a month from then, we see Kurt on a mission with the rest of Blue Team. I don't think Chief is there, though. Chief isn't. It's just because I think he is out and about doing Chief things. Yep. As he does, naturally. Yep. Yeah, because something about Blue Team for the most part, it is like it's Fred, Linda, Kelly, John, but they kind of like. Some people can come in it sometimes temporarily, or some people can leave for whatever reason. So they are, they find this suspicious activity
at Station Delphi, and they're going to look at this Sha Fujikawa translate engine. I love how they can never just refer to it as a slip space engine.
Yeah.
It's always got to be that full name.
That's
And
branding, baby.
I think you can hear the narrator sometimes, like, you can just hear the defeat in his voice when he has to say it. But so he goes to check this out, and all of a sudden his thruster packs malfunction, and he just goes off into space, and he's starting to pass out.
Yeah, because the thought of it was that, so I think they're trying to ping it from space, and they figured out, oh, there's a leaking engine down there, we can go patch it up, and that it apparently affected his electronics, and that was the thought of all of this.
Yeah. So then, he wakes up, and all of a sudden he's in a bed, and he's in this building, and he has no idea what's going on. And so he's met by Ackerson, and he's like, listen, Ackerson tells him, like, hey, we faked your death. Like, you can no longer see those people that you are. You are officially MIA. So he says, you are going to be training new Spartans. And I think he also says that Ackerson shakes his hand, which Kurt notes that people are like almost terrified of Spartans. So, and it's even crazier to think that Ackerson, who also hates these Spartans, kind of knows he has to work with the Spartans, or at least this one Spartan. So he shakes his hand, which Kurt finds odd. But, he says, listen, you're going to be the trainer for these new Spartans. And he promotes him to lieutenant junior grade. And he also says, okay, your name is Kurt Ambrose.
Yeah.
Cool, because he's like, what's your name? He's like, your name's Kurt what? And we kind of flash back almost to Kurt's like, he's like, I barely remember my life before this. He's like, I have no idea. So like literally Ackerson's like, Ambrose, you're Kurt Ambrose now.
Yeah,
like,
and to give him that slight identity, because he is the Spartan MIA. He's killed in action because he suffered one of the worst Spartan deaths, which is spinning away in space, as we saw in previous books and things like that.
Yeah, Fall of Reach.
Yeah, Fall of Reach. I mean, and so now that he's like, okay, you're now this. This is where you're from. This is your call sign and everything, and then your old life's dead again. This is your new one.
Yeah, and so that's the end of section 1. So basically, Kurt is the new character that we're introduced to, the main guy for this book. I'd say. I'd say he's the main character.
This is Kurt's story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I love this story. We also meet Rear Admiral Rich, Captain Gibson, and Vice Admiral Perengoski. Those three heads of ONI. Kind of the big three, the big bad three.
And you can almost push them to have the same mentality in a different way as the prophets do, where their goal, whether it's a holy journey or whether it's to win this war no matter what, are all along those same lines. And it's really interesting to see that alignment of it.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. So like, those big bad three who, whatever they say go, and people really don't want to cross them.
Yeah, and what I love when they write it, and this could just be a far-fetched thing I've thought of, but they're always written in this large antechamber, whether it be Covenant or whether it be human, that, they're always high and mighty.
Yeah.
And they get to say, and they basically get to dictate and control the pawns of war, which is really, really interesting. I really love that idea that no matter Covenant, human, whatever, there's always someone controlling it that has no bearing to ever be in that war, but they'll always kind of control the pawns and figure out what they have to do. And we've seen it before when Ackerson, when we didn't know he was trying to do something like this, that he was just trying to get the Spartans defunded because he wanted to do his own thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, why are you trying to take away these, to put it bluntly, these objects of war that are doing really well in more of a selfish kind of noble pursuit for your own good?
Yeah. But so let's move on, to this section 2, which is Spartan III. We're at a Camp Currahee on Onyx, and we see 497 volunteers. That's something else. All these kids were approached, said, do you want to do this? And they all volunteered. We also see Mendez again.
Yeah, so we get some Mendez action again.
Yeah, and he's still as cool as ever in this story. I love his character in
this
story.
Older, smoking his Sweet Williams.
Yeah, they note he's a little older, a little more aged, but overall he's back to help train the Spartans, but he's not. He's working under Kurt Ambrose. He's not the one on top now.
Exactly. That's why they gave him the promotion, was to make him a higher officer rank over Mendez so that he can go ahead and kind of command him to do what he needs to do.
Yeah, and so basically they need only 300 trainees. So what they do is they put them on a Pelican, and they're like, you have a nighttime high altitude drop from this Pelican. And even Mendez is like, what?
Yeah.
Like the guy who is like the biggest dick to all of them is like, are you sure? And and Kurt's like, this is like tip of the iceberg. This will be the easiest thing they do.
Well,
like,
you have to remember, they're like 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, they're like 5. I think like or anywhere from like 4 to 6, 4 to 7. Like these are children, and they're all orphans too. And he's like, if this is the life they want.
There's one thing orphans know, it's parachuting in the dark.
And so I like we meet Shane A112, and he's kind of nervous about this, and so this other kid, Robert, he pushes him off. Robert AO57. He's kind of like a taller, older kid.
Yeah, I think he's like a year older. And because Shane, in his mind, he's watching all these people jump. Because first to jump
is like a little girl, right?
Yeah, it's a little girl. She's like, peace out, jumps out.
She's just gone.
And so Shane's like, I can do this. But then he does kind of what a lot of people do when you're afraid of heights. You get to it and you go, whoa. Body.
You get that feeling in your stomach, and you just like, yeah. It's a feeling really can't be described.
No, and so obviously for a 5-year-old with this, and so Shane pushes him. He's like, go, and so just pushes him, throws him out of the night.
Yeah, which is crazy, and they both hit the ground, and Shane actually noticed
with a parachute though. They both land.
Yes,
they don't smack the ground, and the story ends.
No, they do have they all have a parachute. And I think Shane notices like there's blood coming down his leg.
Yeah, because he did a little bit of a hard landing because he tried to figure out where his pull cord was, his ripcord, and he finally got it. But then he did. If you guys have ever seen any parachute land a little hard, if you land on your feet, you like crumple your knees up into your body. So like he said, that happened, and it could have possibly been an injury along his side or something like that. Yeah,
and so the next thing you know, Robert, who pushed him off, I guess it really isn't as mean as you think. He like walks up to introduce himself. He puts out his hand to shake it, and so then Shane just decks him, and they just get in a fight. And so Ambrose and Mendez break it up, but something they note instantly is like, they just did this and they're already like fighting, and they're like, this is very good, because I can only imagine how I would feel. I'd probably be drained after that. But the fact that like, okay, they just did this high altitude jump, which is probably something no child should ever have to do, and now they're in a fist fight, like that's what we need.
Yeah, and this is going to go back just a little bit as I thought of this detail. One of the big things, and the reason why they're trying to just get these big classes out there right away, is you had Ackerson promise this first unit, we'll have 300. They'll have 3,000. They'll have 30,000.
Oh,
we'll keep training, and we'll eventually have, hundreds of thousands of Spartans within so many years to be able to fight this battle. So that's why a lot of the stringencies on selection was pulled, and why he's like, this has to work.
Yeah. And so then we kind of move a few years later. And so Kurt is at the UNSC point of no return, and he's briefed on Alpha Company's performance. And basically it's kind of again, another sad story we see is that there was an Operation Prometheus. And so the mission was a success, but it was at the cost of everyone. Yeah. So all 300 are dead. And so it's like Kurt's really kind of upset about this whole thing, and we're in the room with all the rest of those big three, and for a slight second we see some empathy from Parangoski. Something they know is that for just like a sentence, she says, listen, this was like a tragedy, but then she snaps back to being evil Oni, and it's like, but we do it again. Yeah. And I even like that at one point they're showing kind of video of all of this. And you can like Ambrose can tell, or not Ambrose, Mendez can tell that like this is upsetting Ambrose. So eventually he turns it off, and like you can see someone is upset about that. But Mendez is upset too. But he's really trying to like hide his emotions. And Kurt even says that he does it well. But it's just crazy to think that like we're seeing all these children die at this mission. Well, especially Kurt Ambrose being the people person. And him being like, this happened under my watch. These are my trainees who are losing their lives out there, and for what? So you kind of see him,
I wouldn't say like a moral dilemma yet, but it's that kind of pride, and as a Spartan, like I'm letting my team down.
Yeah, because he says this whole thing was his fault. He's like, I should have, even though the point of all these missions are suicide missions, he's like, no, they should have survived because I trained them. Like,
exactly.
Mendez and I trained them. So he pushes for upgrades to their armor. That's one thing he really wants. So after seeing everything that happened with Alpha Company, we kind of get this flashback to Beta Company's training. And they're training right now because they know that some candidates are going to get cut. And so it's ring the bell, kind of like that callback in the Fall of Reach.
Yeah, it's that same type of setup where you and your team, have to get there as a team, which I assume it's implied because that's what it was in the Fall of Reach to kind of build that team building. But you have to get to ring that bell, and then obviously the slowest or candidates who don't make it are the ones who are cut from the Spartan program.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's we see Tom and Lucy and 2 other Spartan IIIs with them, and it's kind of crazy to see the relationship because at one point I think like Lucy stands up and Tom like slams her down and punches her in the stomach, and then they get in a fight just over what decisions they should be making.
Yeah, so the premise of this exercise is you have kind of like they did in one of the combat missions with Fall of Reach as well, where you have like Marines and some ODSTs that were there guarding the Pelican drop. This one, they have basically these Spartan washouts and a couple other members that have stun rounds that are trying to take the members of Beta Company out while they try and ring that bell.
Yeah, and there's been kind of like, this personal vendetta at one point. Companies have gone and disappeared, and they were last seen with these washouts. So they're definitely kind of very terrified of them. But eventually they do ring the bell, and then they decide, okay, we did this early enough that whenever the other companies get here, it's payback time. So they basically spend the next few hours just fucking with these washouts and these Marines, and eventually Mendez and Kurt finally put an end to it. And I think they're worried that even like Mendez is going to shoot them because he seems pissed, but Kurt kneels over to Tom and says like, good work.
Yeah, because it's insane because they went in with really nothing, kind of the same way you have to find your own weaponry. And so they disabled these turrets and were using those, and then found some like flashbangs and found all this other stuff on them. And yeah, so it's just a fantastic scene, but it also shows that brutality of candidates where like they talked about the behavioral issues. So stuff like this is just really involved where it's not part of their mission, but they'll do it because it's more of a vendetta and payback.
Revenge, yeah, because that's what they say. It's payback time. And so then we also learn that regardless of these upgrades, they go back to Operation Torpedo that we learned about at the beginning of the book, and everyone's assumed dead once again. And then it's kind of expanded upon a little bit that, well, now we have to train Gamma Company, that third company. And this is when, Kurt finds out, okay, Tom and Lucy survived. And originally, I think it was Ackerson wanted at least Lucy locked up because it's like she's just mentally checked out. Yeah,
he basically wanted to, what I'd assume is put her in the mental institute of ONI. What I assume is to keep her away from stuff, but also experiment on her. But then Kurt was like, no, I want both of them under me now.
Yeah, like I need them to help me train more Spartans. So now we have 3 Spartans and Mendez training Gamma Company. So it kind of jumps ahead a little bit. And that's the thing, kind of a little bit of a dislike that Alex and I talked about before we started recording this is Eric does like to jump around within this book that where it's sometimes like within a sentence or two. We're now 20 years ahead or we're 5 years back. So,
and I thought about this when I was reading it as well. All of Nylund's books can adapt to screen right away.
Yeah.
Because they're already written in that sense of jumping to here, jumping to there, jumping back to there. We're on a visual sense, understandable. Audio or reading sense, a little different.
Yeah.
So now we are at Gamma Company where we're seeing them at the same part of their training whenever Chief and the rest of the original Spartan IIs were going through their biometric and kind of chemical-induced training, when they're getting all their like pump of drugs to get the steel bones.
Call back to the scenes in Fall of Reach.
Exactly. And so they're all undergoing this, but one of the big things that Kurt checks out are there's 2 extra vials.
2 or 3, right?
Yes, 2 or 3, because they talk about yes, 3, because 2 of them interact with each other. But we just noticed that Kurt's looking at them. He's kind of eyeballing it.
Doesn't someone come in and like enter, like a doctor comes in and kind of like, need help? And he's like, nope. And just like dips real quick.
Yeah, so it seems like something sketchy's going on because he just closes it up real quick, dip sets out, it's a Jesse term, and leaves. And he's like, no, I don't need any help. And then we discover through some talk with Ackerson that things are going great, all this stuff. And then there's an AI Deep Winter.
Yeah, Deep Winter helped train a lot of these Spartans. So yeah, doesn't Deep Winter send a message, and this is where it kind of gets weird in sci-fi. He sends a message to Kurt through slip space, and it goes into a lot of detail on how that works.
Yeah, so what happens is that, so we go through this process, the drugs are done, boom, we're good to go. Kurt then meets with like a top general who has this kind of...
On the ship,
who has like this slip space orb. It's like this thing that can transmit itself through slip space without having to decelerate. And it was kind of interesting to see. And so through that, we see that Deep Winter sends Kurt an encrypted message. And it's an encrypted log that's talking about all the chemicals that were induced into these children. And he said there's 3 anomalies that are different than the original cocktail. And one, he reads out, it basically causes them to, I would say it's the best way to think about whenever you knock a brute's armor off and they go feral, it's kind of like that. They don't feel any pain. They don't feel any stress. And the
adrenaline just goes through the roof, right?
Yeah, they get a spike of adrenaline where they can never pass out from pain. They just fight through the pain. But the side effect of that is they'll have mental deterioration.
Yeah.
And they'll just go insane.
Yeah, and they said they need to continually give them this kind of drug.
So
that way.
There's a second drug that basically helps counteract that.
Yeah.
And then there's a third one. I forget what it does, but it's another thing that basically deals with like heightened mental sense, so you can see a little bit better in the dark, and you can have just quicker reaction time.
Yeah, and even within the eyes of Oni, all 3 of these are like big no-nos.
Yeah,
which is crazy to think. When Oni's like, we shouldn't do that, it's like, we actually probably shouldn't.
Because we learn, so he's like, oh, Deep Winter, thank you so much for the information. And immediately he's like, we need to get rid of Deep Winter.
Yeah,
and you
to
realize,
Ackerson, yeah.
Yeah, and you realize that Kurt was the one who subscribed this cocktail.
Yeah, at first we think that it's like Kurt discovering this, but it's actually, and he's doing this because he's like, I can't lose them.
Yeah.
Like, and so he's trying to do everything he can, which is crazy to think that Deep Winter's a smart AI, if I'm correct. And Kurt even notices, like, you really care about them. And he's like, I do. I've cared about all of these Spartans like this. Because Deep Winter didn't know that Kurt did it. He's like, you need to investigate this. This is not good.
Deep Winter genuinely cared, just as like all the other smart AIs they had that helped train, like really cared about the students and really cared about everyone there. But realizing that, Kurt even kept it from the smart AI that he was doing all this.
Yeah, it's just kind of like that funny moment. He's like, okay, pushes stop, and then turns around and is like, we need to get rid of this guy right now. And so whenever they get done with the Deep Winter issue, Kurt sees that all of his Spartans had survived the augmentation process, which is kind of like a first. And so he's really thrilled and proud of them. He even said before, I forget which Spartan it was, but, he came up and said, like, listen, if I don't make this, I wouldn't have changed anything. And he says, you're all going to make this. And sure enough, they did.
Yeah, as we saw from the other experience, also Fall of Reach, from losing a number of the Spartans from that experiment, that I guess the cocktail itself is perfected in the way that it's administered or whatever they're putting into them, that it's working.
Yeah, this is kind of like 4 times the charm. So I'm assuming at this point they should kind of have it down. So yeah, that was section 2. We get introduced to Shane and Robert, who, have since perished from Alpha Company, and as well as we had saw Deep Winter within this. I know we didn't really bring him up, but it's crazy to think that, like, okay, we kind of start to get to know these characters, and this is going to, spoiler alert, happen within the book. Characters that you're going to start to like get taken away pretty quickly. And I think I kind of like that about Nylund's writing, is that he really wants to evoke some kind of emotion within you reading his stories, and it's always worked.
It really does. And if you go back, I don't remember which piece of media it's in, but they talk about that right now they need every AI they can get. They have just a finite amount because they can't keep producing them fast enough to get them out to the ships, get them out. Because with Keyes, whenever Keyes had to get his own ship, he was able to pilot without an AI.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that Oni just is like, nah, get rid of him.
Well, he's also at the end of his 7-year tenure, right? He says he's like, I'm basically done. Like, this is my dying message.
Yeah.
save these kids. And it's just kind of now we see this morality pop up of like, shit, like, what do I do?
Yeah, well, especially if an AI knows the right path of it and a human is like, nah, it's all good.
Yeah, so, but within this section, we saw the creation of 2 different Spartan companies, all but 2 have died. So roughly 600 or 700 or 800 Spartans have all perished, Spartan IIIs.
Yeah, at least that. And then because, yeah, you've had at least 300 in the first, at least 300 in the second class. Yeah. Because during that meeting with Margaret Perengowski, she even brought up, she's like, okay, I thought you said by this time, we're going to have X number of Spartans going, and we're just losing all of them. Like, where is this going to start to triple, double?
Yeah. Well, they talked about, okay, let's kind of loosen up some of the requirements, which instantly, like, Kurt's like, no, do not do that.
Especially behavioral and a couple other things that would just really put everyone else in peril because then it's not, it's anger-based, not team-based.
Yeah. So moving forward, we're now on Section 3, Intruders, and it starts October 31st, 2552. So I think I kind of like the idea of, I think Eric kind of knew when this was going to be released or projected, or maybe this was a last-minute edit, but I think this was intentional. There's no way this is a coincidence. But we're starting to see Gamma Company, and they're doing this exercise, and we're seeing Team Saber, Katana, and Gladius. And I like that I can't remember the objective.
They're competing for top honors.
Yeah, and it's something that they've been talking about. They've been working on for the past a few weeks or a few months, I think. So this was definitely like a tense moment, regardless of everything that's about to happen.
And to go back just a little further, he did that because whenever they basically gave Onyx to Kurt. And Mendez was like, make a training ground.
Yeah.
So he basically did the same thing that he had as a kid, but souped it up a little bit, changed some things to push him a little harder.
Yeah.
But still had, as we get the callback, the same type of exercise where everyone's split into teams.
Yeah, but this isn't just like, oh, they're kind of pushing against each other. They have guns and stun rounds, and they're like, if you get hit with a stun round, your limb will go numb. And they said like if you get it in the head, regardless of wearing a helmet, you're out. It's crazy to think that like they're forcing the washouts of this to go against them, and they've always talked about how these washouts, like, it's been rumored like have killed some of former Spartans because they're near Zone 67, where they've talked about these they've seen these red eyes coming from there and these quote ghosts. So.
They saw like these red hills, the hills of eyes type thing.
Yeah, what I like, maybe it's just because it's the day we're starting to get this kind of creepy, ominous feeling.
And to kind of give you a synopsis of what's all going on, we follow Team Saber. That's our main team we're going to follow throughout this, and Katana and Gladius on their own, doing their own thing. So this is kind of like our blue team, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
And so they're in the training ground. They've got their rifles. They've got their stun rounds. We are introduced to Ash, G099, Holly, G003, Olivia, G291, Mark, G313, and Dante, G188, all part of Saber. And so they're going through and they realize, okay, we thought that the sniper would have taken us out. That's why we took this route, but we see it's a double trap.
Yeah, I like that one point. It's like they not only planned for this route, but they planned for an escape route. Like if we attack them, this is how they're going to try to escape. So it's crazy to see like this military mentality coming from all of this.
Yeah, that they already kind of knew that. And then they start to hear these explosions, out and about, and they're like, I don't think that was a grenade. I don't think that was bigger. That was a bigger explosion.
Yeah.
And then it starts to get louder and bigger. And they start to think like, are we under attack? Is the Covenant here?
Yeah, well, because they complete the mission, but then they're like, well, there's got to be something else to this. Like, it wasn't the fact that they were that good. They're instantly just like, there's got to be something else to this. Like,
yeah, and they think, is this another training exercise? Are they actually going to start like deploying archer missiles on us? Because that's what they thought too. They're like, is it archer missiles? Is it local? Is it not? And so they kind of all went into a panic and tizzy. And so we then have, this huge explosion that takes out like a whole mesa, basically. So then we have Team Saber run into this cave area and hide it out and try to figure out what's going on. And we finally first see the description of what a Sentinel is. And, everyone, I love it that Nylund does this. When you read the book, you'll see no matter if it's these kids, if it's elites, if it's higher up in the UNSC, or if it's a shipmate, they all describe the Sentinel similarly, but different.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, it's because they always mention like the 3 like panels.
Yeah, the arms
that are along it with its red eye. And each section of Covenant, human, whatever, it's all described as the same, like 3 arms and an eye. But if you go back, it's cool how the Covenant's like very alien tech with it, how the kids are just very rudimentary and like, it's got 3 floaty arms and a red eye, and just talking about all those things through, which is really, really cool. So anyway, I digress. So the kids are hiding out in there, and they realize that the Sentinel beam can heat up and fire, and so they're trying to use their stealth suits to get around, and they start to run, and they have to go.
Dipset. They're gone.
They, as Jesse would say, they dipset. Copyright. And they go, and they're running along, and you see Ash and his units try and get out of there because a lot of them are dealing with Team Katana, who made this invisible bunker on top of this hill. Anyway, the battle is raging out. They're trying to get away. Biggest thing to take away from this is that, so the Sentinel starts to follow them and tries to take down Holly. And they soon learn, obviously they only have stun rounds, but also that it just pings off and doesn't do anything to them at all.
They discover it's like overshields, right?
Yeah, they have overshields. So what Ash decides is, I'll chuck a rock at it.
I think someone made a joke about this in our Discord.
Yeah, it's a callback to, that's how Spartans learn. That's their first technical weapon.
Yeah.
And so he launches it and it hits it. He notices that it kind of scuffs it. And it gets kind of pissed off at him, and it turns around and chases him down. And so he's running, finally gets pinned down by it, and he just starts talking. He's like, why are you doing this? And then some garbled language comes through, and he's like, I recognize that word. That's Latin. But why are you here? Like, what's going on? I mean you no harm. And you start to learn that the Sentinels have an understanding of language. You can figure out a translation to like...
because it starts to talk to him.
Yeah, it starts to talk, and it's basically like, and it goes back to the talk with Halo 1 with 343 Guilty Spark of Chief being a reclaimer.
Yeah, it brings up reclaimers.
And it's like, we're looking for the reclaimer. You are not it. So defense protocol is activated.
Yeah. And so it starts to charge up its laser and it's getting ready to take him out. But then everyone else realizes its weakness as well. So they all pelt it and destroy it with rocks. Very primal but effective way to get rid of these Sentinels for now.
Yeah, because they realize, because as Spartans do, you adapt to what you can figure out, and they realize that works because we learn that their overshields block high velocity projectiles, but if it's slow enough, the shield doesn't activate.
Yeah, a bullet versus a rock, it's going to make, and granted from a Spartan who's been trained for this, it's gonna hurt enough to take it out eventually. So yeah, that was Section 3, Intruders, and we meet Gamma Company.
Yes, we've got, as I said before, we've got Ash, Holly, Olivia, Mark, and Dante, who are big characters that we're going to learn that really, play up in this story, in Kurt's story, as we want to call it.
Yeah, Kurt's story.
And this is where we first come in contact with Sentinels outside of Chief's story.
Yeah, because it even like I guess within the first time of the media outside of anything revolving around the games themselves, because we see them in the Flood, but those are more just the retelling of Combat Evolved.
Well, exactly, and that's just Chief and that small amount of Marine companies that sees it. But you have to figure at like the same time, we're having all these stories happening almost simultaneously.
Yeah, we're going to see there's a lot more events happening.
Yeah, and so it's really, and that goes back to, I love that each party describes them differently because they didn't get the intel from Halo yet. They didn't have Cortana to relay everything about it because Halsey wasn't there. There was no one who was part of that story arc. So it's really cool that we get to see that. And I think one of my favorite phrases from one of the Sentinels, he was talking to Ash, was, you need to listen to some more stuff. You know what you should do to listen to more stuff?
What should he listen to?
You should probably get a free audiobook from Audible.
Sentinel said that?
Sentinel said it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/finishthefight and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs and download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/finishthefight to get started today. Why Audible? Audible content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more from the leading audiobook publishers, broadcasters, and entertainers. We've been pushing Audible a bunch. Jesse and I have fully converted to it and just do most everything with this because it allows us to take notes. It allows us to go through the book, and definitely recommend Ghost of Onyx. Like it's one of the first stories that we actually get to see outside of the chief.
Yeah.
He's only mentioned that little tidbit, and the rest of it's just really awesome. So definitely recommend it. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/finishthefight. Again, that's audibletrial.com/finishthefight for your free audiobook. Thank you, Audible, for sponsoring today's podcast.
Now we're at section 4, Dr. Catherine Halsey, and we see Halsey's on this stolen rebel ship, and Kelly's still knocked out. This is definitely now continuing from where we left off with Halsey's story from First Strike. So definitely I like Nylund really going off of these kind of multiple loose ends that he created at the end of First Strike. And so they made their way to Onyx. They're by Onyx, right?
Yeah. So Halsey, if you remember in the previous book, she went ahead and got that message from Ackerson that she stole that got like the info about Spartans and this planet Onyx.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we're seeing now is why she left them previously.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of appear at Onyx, and she's still trying to figure all of this out. And so as she's making her way towards the planet, all hell breaks loose, and the Sentinels we see aren't just worrying about the ground. They're also worrying about what's going on not only in the air, but in space too.
And we start to see the numbers. It's not just a couple of them that are on this planet. We start to see there's 10s, there's 20s, there's hundreds. Like we start to see the mass of them each time we get reintroduced. So a number of them come out to meet Halsey, and this is kind of she wakes up Kelly. She's like
I kind of need a Spartan for this.
Yeah, I kind of need some help. And she realizes that there's not much she can do. The Shah Fujikawa that they had is leaking.
Yeah, it's useless.
So as these drones attack, they realize with the damage engine that all they have is their auxiliary stuff they can really use. And so Halsey puts it on this crash course to kind of do a slingshot into the planet.
Yeah.
And Kelly realizes that Halsey doesn't have a pressure suit, and Halsey's trying to do all this stuff and starting to pass out, but Halsey's still able to use her hands and like all this other crazy stuff. It's a really neat scene, and Kelly admires her because she sees blood trickling down her. She's like, she's still alive, and she's a badass woman. And so with this slingshot, they're able to go in, avoid being decimated by the drones, and they crash land.
Yeah, and Halsey's passed out at this point, right?
Yeah, she's already passed out from that drop and all that.
So yeah, as Kelly's trying to assess what's going on, she's making her way through. All of a sudden, she suspects something or someone watching her, and so she attacks whoever this is. And they kind of disappear, and she's very confused. She's like, because I think she grabs their arm and pulls them, and she's like, if this was a regular person, like their arm would be out of their socket or something.
Yeah, she's basically she throws them, and she's like, yeah, if that was a regular person, they would have been basically torn in two. Yeah,
so she's instantly kind of really confused about this, but then we hear Kurt. She hears Kurt's voice. That's like, no time, Kelly. Like, get out of there. And she's instantly like she hears his voice, and like it's like one of those, she's like taken aback. She's like, whoa, wait a second, I know that voice. And so they eventually meet up with Saber Team, Kurt, and Chief Mendez. And so it's like crazy, like we see this reunion because it was like 20 years prior that they thought Kurt had died. And so now it's like everything's coming back, like, oh my God, you're actually alive, which I've never been in this situation, but I can only imagine like getting attached to someone and thinking they're dead, and then just years later meeting back up with them.
Yeah, because she sees Mendez and gets that recognition, like, oh, like you're here, that's awesome. Like I haven't seen you forever. And then she, hears Kurt's voice, and he's cloaked, and then like comes out, and they show, and it's really, really cool. It's just a really cool reunion piece.
Heartwarming. It is heartwarming.
It is, and they talk about like we don't have time for this, but like, hey,
let's go.
Yeah.
So yeah, eventually then Halsey does come to, and once again, we see this thing where she guesses that it's Kurt because she starts naming off Spartans whose bodies haven't been found, and she's like, "You're Kurt, aren't you?" And he's impressed by the fact that he's in this completely different armor, but she can just tell who he is.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things. Is she's like looking him up and down, like, I know all of my Spartans. There's only 3 that are actually missing in action. One I know is dead. So it's either you or this other one. It's definitely you, Kurt.
Yeah, it's definitely you. Halsey then eventually, she's like, okay, well, I like is that everyone keeps calling what's going on drones, and she keeps saying they're Sentinels. They're Sentinels. So she's correcting everyone. Like,
yeah, she's like, I was there. I know what they are.
Yeah, these are Sentinels. And so she then sends a transmission back to Earth. And she's like, hey, come to Onyx. We're kind of screwed right now. We need all the reinforcements you can send. And so this message gets to Earth right around the events of Halo 2. So now we're starting to see all of this link up.
Okay, so after this message is sent and after we get the little reunion piece, this is where Nylund shifts over, and now we are on the Covenant side of the book, or kind of getting the Covenant point of view.
This is like the first time within the book we're getting that narrative, right?
Exactly, and so we are on the ship, the Incorruptible. And so the Incorruptible's commander, Shipmaster Tano Enaruri, is murdered due to the fact that he was overcome by religious fervor and ordered the ship to be infected by the flood, because he was one that truly followed the Covenant and was like, hey, these are holy beings. I want to be, I want to go to the great beyond. And if this is what the prophets will, this is the way to get there.
Yeah, well, we start to like see that the Covenant during the Great Schism, it wasn't like the elites just drew back and were like, okay, we're done with this religion thing. Like there were so many factions that we learned later on throughout the lore that was split off, and that there are still some elites and Covenant members who are like, we're done with the prophets version of this, but we're still going to believe in this. And that's who we kind of start seeing throughout the rest of this story.
Yeah, because this is the first time in print, I believe, we're starting to really see the Great Schism take effect.
Yeah. And so we realize that Voro na Montecristi, he murdered Tano due to this. And so I like that it was one of those things, he did this in front of like everyone on the deck of the ship. And so there are two hunter, Perudo Zeta Kana and Waruno Zeta Yatno. And so they were like his guards. And so we kind of see that they really didn't do anything. Like, it's like if they weren't able to protect the shipmaster, they were supposed to then kill whoever did it. But
yeah, it was kind of this weird war raging they had, because the chapter starts off, or this section of the book starts off so cool. It's like a mobster scene.
Yeah.
Because he basically puts this needler, the back of his head just fires and just bolts a needle right through his head.
Yeah.
And just lets the blood spill.
Yeah, and everyone on the ship kind of realizes like he was basically gone, and so they make Montecristi the shipmaster, and so now he's the shipmaster of the Incorruptible, and he tells one of the grunts on there, clean up, like take the body out, and one of them starts to clean up the blood, and he says no, leave the blood here, like his blood needs to be here, which I like is also he does talk about some kind of like regret, because this is someone who he looked up to, and he's just like, this sucks, but his blood needs to be here for us to remember like what happened here.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a double-edged sword for him, because you're right. I think he needed that remembrance and to kind of have his old shipmaster and mentor here with him, but also to realize like, this is what I've done, and this is what this war and this religious zealotry is causing.
Yeah. And so then we start to see like, oh shit, there are some Covenant ships starting to attack us. Now we're starting to see the schism start to come in full effect. And during this, all of a sudden, a third party comes in, and it's flood-infected ships come in. So now we see kind of this stalemate of like, okay, let's stop and fight off the flood, because they'll just kill us all. And then we're going to take out the flood and then go back to fighting each other.
Well, so going back a little bit with the Tenebrous and the Twilight Compunction, which were the brute ships. So it's a really cool naval battle. They're starting out. And then, yeah, you're right. Out of slip space, we're like, who's that? And
like,
then,
whoa, hold up. Who is that?
Yeah, and you realize that there's transmission coming through. Like, they're on here. Like, please don't let them convert me. Don't make them change me. And then the transmission cuts. So everyone who's starting to fight from both the brutes and the elite side, all the ships start to turn. And that ship, which I thought was really cool, and he talks about the nobility and honor of it, they lower their shields. And then shipmaster says, everyone give me access to your weapons, because I guess with being a shipmaster on one of the pilot ships, you can control all the weaponry and fire rates. So he does that, decimates that first ship, realizes that ship over there, that one was probably too close. That one might have flood spores get to it, and we have to do it. And so they lower their shields as well, and they understand what has to happen, and that ship gets decimated as well. So it's kind of this, like you said, it's not a bonding moment, but survivability moment where they're like, hold on, guys. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. But then, like you said, as soon as that threat's dealt with, they're like, all right,
back at it. But then Montecristi says like, let's get out of here. like, this fight's going on. Let's just jump into slip space because we are going to die. And I think we should be able to do more because this is one of those times, it's like, oh, the elites fight into the death. They never back out. But Monocre's like, not me, because I know I'm going to die. Like, I can do something better elsewhere. So they get the fuck out of there.
And at that same time that we see this happen and that slip space happens, we then go to the brute point of view. On the Twilight Compunction.
Is this the first time we're seeing things from a brute point of view?
A little bit earlier, we had, I don't know, maybe a page or two that was on the Twilight Compunction, just to get an idea of who the crew was.
Yeah.
But we didn't really see much after that until now, when all the ships got together. Because basically the Twilight Compunction jumped in to all of this. And so the Twilight Compunction fires upon these two cruisers that they see, which is the Lawgiver and the Incorruptible. And so from their point of view, they fire and they realize that with two of them, like, they have these maneuvers where one can go in front of the other and absorb a blast. Their shields go down. They retreat, and the other one goes in front and blocks with their shields. And so the Twilight Compunction fires, and I believe with combined fire that they have with the rest of the fleet, they go ahead and decimate Lawgiver and just take it out. That's when you have the Incorruptible. It's like, hey, we did our part here. We're outnumbered now. We have like you said, a better mission, a better idea what we have to do. Let's get out of here. And so that's when the brute on the Twilight Compunction says, as they should when presented with superior firepower, even if that power was an illusion, saying, you should leave because we are a bigger ship. But as an elite, it's really weird that you didn't stay till the end, because they would have realized that when the Twilight Compunction also got shot by those two frigates, they were down. They had nothing. Weapons offline, shields were offline, but they didn't realize that. And he's like, whoop, that's a good day for us.
Yeah, they kind of made it out by the skin of their teeth, essentially. And so that's the end of Section 4. And we're introduced to a few new Covenant characters.
We got Voro Nar Montecri, Peruto Zeta Kona, Waruna Zeta Yatno, Quasas, Gargantum, Xanten Yar Watanri, Uru Losene. And a couple others which come up later in the book we'll talk about. But obviously this is the first we're getting in the book of some of the higher-ups for both the brutes and elites.
Yeah,
within our shipmasters.
Seeing that hierarchy and whatnot.
Especially for brutes. They were actually seeing that because the only other really brutes we saw was when Chief fought them off and stuck a grenade down his pants.
Yeah, so, and even in the games, like, other than Tartarus, we're not seeing a lot of, like, how the culture is or military structure is with the brutes, and clearly now with this schism, it's starting to change a little more.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see with the Jirahani that they do have, because in the game, it almost feels like they don't have intelligence, because they just go a brute form, basically, whenever you knock their armor off, but you do see that they are a brutish, as the name suggests, race. They still have hierarchy. They still have everything that another militaristic thing would have.
Yeah. So let's move on to Section 5, Blue Team. And so now we're back on Earth. This is 2 weeks after the New Mombasa slip space event. And we are with Fred, Will, and Linda.
Yeah, and we get to see them defending Earth.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's kind of expanding on the lore of what happened to Earth beyond those two missions we played in Halo 2.
Yeah, because there's one part where they go to the bottom of the sea. There's a part where they go to Antarctica to fight a Covenant drilling team. And a lot of it they're talking about, it's not necessarily to repel the invaders. It's to basically push them out, which they do repel, but to stop them long enough so that they don't find what they need to find.
Yeah.
Because as we've seen, once they get a thing they need, they just glass a planet.
Yeah, so they're just like, if you're looking for something here, let's just completely fault that. And we have yet to see the arc yet. We only know about it, so clearly that's what they're kind of looking for.
Yeah, and obviously if the humans are on Earth and if that's their holy home planet in a way, why not look there?
So what are they doing once we get to the narrative here?
So after our little montage of heroics, as the book says it, we now see all of them in Havana, in Cuba. And the reason that they're there is one of the only space elevators left is there. It's an old, I don't want to say rickety one, but basically the way to describe it is it's one that has seen some use, is in need of repair, but it'll still allow them to bring supplies up out of orbit as opposed to the Covenant being able to beam stuff down.
Yeah.
So the team drops in, and they realize that already, there's brutes there.
Yeah. And, well, I think Fred even mentions at one point, he's like, because they see a lot of them, they're like, hand to hand, like, we can't do this because Chief couldn't take out one.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have Linda eye up 2 brutes, 2 shots, and I love the description, both through their right eye and also blowing off half their ugly face.
Yeah.
And so she starts it. So they all give the all clear, and Fred starts going in and scouting around. He's like, I don't really see anything. So he runs around a corner, immediately bumps into a brute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't he say he like worries that like his suit is malfunctioning due to like some salt water or something backed up in it?
So basically having been in all those missions that were, not having time to clean his suit or do anything, he's like, why wasn't that on the radar? And he's panicking. So he fights the brute off, kills it, and then he cleans off. He realizes it has like salt crusted on it from the salt water.
Yeah.
And he cleans off his motion sensor. And as soon as he does that, there's like 6 blips running towards him.
Yeah, like that would be like absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
It doesn't then like he starts fighting them off, and Linda also helps fight off more within that.
Yeah. So he starts running, starts fighting them off, and they realize we have to get to that elevator. And they start running towards the elevator. And as he gets there, he took a brute shot from a down brute and sees that these brutes are getting in the elevator and the door's closing. So I love this. He just fires a couple grenades in, lets those go off, and he dives in sideways with the doors scraping his armor, and he lands. And the brutes were kind of stunned from the grenades, but also that this one Spartan would just take them on hand to hand.
Yeah.
So he opens up, shoots one in his mouth as he's like yelling at him.
Oh yeah, because then it like describes like like the brute keeps going for a second and then just stops.
Yeah, it just stops.
So it's like kind of that adrenaline rush, and then it's like setting in like, oh, this brute is dead.
Yeah, because he pumped like half a clip into his stomach, and the brute was like, no big deal. And then like he opens his mouth to yell in charge, and he pumps the other half of the clip through him. He's like, 1, 2, dead. And then the last brute, because he falls on top of him.
Yeah.
And then the last brute in there is like, boom, hammer fists coming up. And then you hear 2 shots fly through the elevator. And he still got his hands raised, and then he eventually just falls. And Linda sniped him through it. Everyone gets in. They take the elevator up. They lock the controls out. And they realize, because they get the message from Lord Hood, they're like, hey, you got to get out of here. You got to get over to this area. We just got this message relayed from Halsey. We need to get you over to Onyx.
Yeah, it's like immediately. Isn't the issue that it's like that would take weeks to do
in a UNSC ship? Because they're like, that would take weeks. We need to have these slip space jumps. We need to get this charged. And then they realize in orbit is like 3 Covenant battleships.
Yeah.
Or cruisers.
Yeah, and it's kind of like they talk about this is an absolutely impossible task. But we literally just did this last book, so why couldn't we do this now?
Yeah, and it's always brought up. I like this. They talk about in the book, too, when they're like, it's an impossible task. And like, oh, that's what Spartans do.
Yeah, one of the points of Spartans is to prove an impossible task is actually very much so possible.
And so, going back with Havana, I guess human and Earth denuclearization was happening. Basically, dumb nukes were there, and it was basically the warheads were there. And they realized, okay, well, they're in the elevator with them. Let's take them up. And we'll use them as bait in a trap. Because there's those other Covenant ships. We need to get out of here. We need to get to slip space. But obviously, if we try and take these guys out, it's not going to work by ourselves.
Yeah, no.
So they take the elevator up. They fly out. They get into the ship. Get into one of the ships. And they make their way to a panel. And this is kind of where Fred has this inner monologue talking about how, once again, the Covenant doesn't innovate. They imitate.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's saying, well, if a UNSC ship had ever been captured, and they knew how they had inputted it. They had hacked in. They obviously would have refitted every single ship to not get hacked in like that.
Yeah.
And he said, here's hoping the Covenant didn't do that, because they have a hacking data pad, and he plugs it in, and he's like, yep, got the handshake. We're good to go.
Yeah.
And so he then, gets all these countdowns ready, tells everybody what to do. And what they're going to do is they're going to vent the ship of all oxygen and atmosphere. They're going to open up all the bulkheads and everything, and basically either fly everything out into space or deprive everything of oxygen and atmosphere.
Very first strike move.
Exactly. And because their suits, as we learn with them being underwater, have recycled oxygen built in. So I think they have like 7 or 15 minutes, something like that, of oxygen. So they vent it all, they let it all happen, and then eventually they make their way out, and they see these dead brutes around. And there's a quote like, brutes may be strong, but they still need oxygen.
Yeah. So basically, then they capture. They're on the Bloodied Spirit.
Yeah, they're on the Blade Spirit.
And so they're like, okay, we're going to then make our way to Onyx. Like, this is the quickest way we're going to be able to do it. They then find themselves within the Great Schism. They find themselves right in the middle of that between the elites and the brutes, which it's just, I kind of like that. This is since Halo 2, so like I think that's one of the things that Bungie wanted them to push was this Great Schism, seeing this true divide between the two factions. And so after some kind of just trying to wiggle their way around, they get the hell out of there. Because I know at one point, I remember something comes on the screen and it's a brute talking to all like the ships. And he's like, okay, we're going to make our way through it. And I guess he's looking at a bunch of different screens. And Fred says that the brute looked at him through the screen and then says demons.
Yeah, because the brute comes on because he's announcing like, guys, what's going on? It's me, brute friend. How you doing?
Good pep talk.
Good pep talk. And then ends it because Fred's sitting there with his translation, thinking it's just a recording. But it's actually, live view.
And he
FaceTiming him.
Think that he could see him too.
Yeah, and then he looks right at him, and he snarls, and then the translation's like demons, and it cuts.
And he's like, shit.
And he's like, oh, just kidding.
Yeah. So they do make their way out of there, and they do find their way on Onyx. And then, what do you know? Here's the general theme of the book: is they're attacked by Sentinels once again. Yeah. Everyone is attacked by Sentinels. Doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah, because we learn, as when Ash was talking to him, they're looking for the Reclaimer. Everything else is an infidel or obsolete and needs to be purged. So anything coming in that's not obviously their Reclaimers, they're like, goodbye.
Yeah, so then they eventually make their way onto Onyx and they meet up with everyone. But I think it's kind of like a no time for reunion. Like, let's go. Gotta get out of here.
Because two things happen with that. One is we learn a little earlier on, but even more now, Sentinels can adapt and refit themselves with other Sentinels.
Yeah, they start to
increase
combine
their damage.
Transformer style shit.
Yeah, it's weird because we don't ever see that in, I don't think, any of the games. We do see those bigger Sentinels that grab your tank and just murder you.
Yeah, Enforcers.
The Enforcers. Yeah. But that's in and of itself its own thing. It's
one unit.
Yeah, it's not a bunch of units put together. Because we see on patrols, they start to do two inside of each other to look both ways type thing. This one, and it's kind of funny because every shipmaster, everyone piloting a ship that comes in, they're like, what's that tiny laser beam going to do to us? We got shields.
And then it's like, okay, now we're 7,000.
Yeah, and they compile together. So this is where, they'd taken damage in that last battle with the brutes and they try to steal the ship.
Yeah.
And their Sha Fujikawa are basically the coils that the Covenant used for their slip space is leaking out plasma.
Yeah.
And so this is where they make the decision. We can't turn them off, but we got to get to that planet. Covenant ships are known for pinpoint accuracy for slip space jumps. So they jump directly on top of the planet.
Isn't this one of those another 1 in a million kind of chances that they do?
Because they like, I don't know, just putting those coordinates, and hopefully this alien machine understands our math too and can put it in their math.
Yeah, well, doesn't Fred kind of like make the assumption like math should be pretty universal?
Yeah, he's like, I hope it is. And so they get in, they're skimming trees, and they crash land, and then they have basically that same type of reunion where they're like, there's a bunch of things moving, but we don't see them. What's going on?
Yeah, and that's where it's just kind of like, no time for explanation. Like, we need to get the fuck out of here. And then that's when we move on to the end of this section, Blue Team. So
yeah, to add one thing, because this is Kurt's team, and that's when Kurt's like, "What's up, guys? Got no time." But then it's really cool to be like, I thought you were dead.
Yeah, again.
That's like the only thing that was really said between them.
Yeah, I forgot about that entirely. But, this is a section where it's like, we really don't, there's no new characters introduced. We see Fred, Linda, and Will, who were all from First Strike. And so I like that they brought Will back, because people had wondered, and there are a lot of theories out there what happened to him while he was on Earth, But yeah, so we see those main characters. Admiral Hood coming in this time. The audiobook, he's not Scottish, as we saw within Halo 2. So that was a good relief.
He grew up. He understood it. He understood that accent was silly, and he went back to his old ways.
But yeah, so those are the main characters that were kind of like, we saw Fred and Linda earlier, but now they're concrete players within Ghosts of Onyx. So now let's move on to Section 6, the Ghosts of Onyx. That's that moment we go, oh, they said it, Ghosts of Onyx. So now the narration goes back to Delta Halo, where this whole Covenant civil war is going down and the Great Schism is taking place. And so, when Halsey sends out that transmission, it gets to Earth, but that doesn't mean it doesn't pass through a few channels before it does. And the elites get a hold of that. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting to talk, I talked about earlier that there were some factions that still held like that Covenant faith.
Sorry, to go back just a little bit too. I love this because we just remember stuff as we go. It's one of my favorite parts about book podcasts is the ooh moments.
Yeah.
So the reason why they intercepted that transmission and kind of the foreshadowing of it, whenever Blue Team took over that ship, they were actually pulled out of slip space.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever that brute transmission happened, and they're like, whoa, we can be pulled out for this? Does that mean, because we heard the message in slip space, does that mean our messages could be going through slip space? Because that's when they heard the Cortana thing from Halsey. And so that's why there's foreshadowing, because Fred's like, oh, can other people hear it? And then
spoiler alert, other people hear it.
Yeah.
So now all the Covenant are on the joyous exaltation. And this is where we see the biggest, baddest Zanghili Imperial Admiral ever, Dianja Watanri. He gets all the shipmasters kind of together, and they're all discussing, like, what are they supposed to do now about this, along with this intercepted message, this as in the Great Schism going on.
Yeah, with the brutes and prophets kind of leaving them out. Because the big thing with Zaitan is that he was so powerful and looked revered in the elite's eyes that he was almost worshipped like a prophet. So the prophets actually banished him.
Yeah, well, it was to the point that, someone would, they would listen to him over a prophet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's kind of, speaking as if he's, a prophet, almost. He's, saying, we're gonna bring this covenant, our covenant, together. And I like that Voro kind of, is I've heard this before from the guys we're about to fight. Mm-hmm. And so him and Zaitan, they don't necessarily butt heads, but you can see some tension there. So Zaitan says to Voro, okay, your fleet is going to go and take care of this whole Onyx thing. Mm-hmm. Basically, and Voro kind of is he just trying to get rid of me? Because, clearly this is, an honor, but at the same time, this is a very sticky mission that he's about to get sent off to. And he says, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to win this whole thing. I have this giant armada. We're going to take over Onyx. We're going to figure out what's so important there. And I'm going to come back a hero.
Yeah, because they realized in that transmission that there's Forerunner tech there on Onyx.
And they're just rubbing their hands together ooh, here we go. Because that's been one of the things that any kind of Forerunner tech, anytime the Covenant learn of Forerunner technology, they're we need this. It's the foundation of all of our technology and our religion. Mm-hmm. So as this is going on, we go to the Sublime Transcendence, and there's a grunt named Quasas. And he sees that these engineers or Huragok are messing with this black box, kind of. And so he starts to kind of play with it too. And he pulls out that voice box.
Yeah, because him and his grunt legion, best way to put it, are in charge of this storage facility. And it's all these human goods and things that they recovered from different battles that he's in charge of. So he's got this really important role. So yeah, whenever the grunts and the Huragoks have this really petty hate for each other.
Yeah, it's weird, kind of they have to coexist, but they kind of hate to do it.
Yeah, because the Huragoks respect the elites, but the grunts they hate. So instead of, we saw before, them taking apart stuff to learn it and repairing it, they'll just take apart Grunt's shit and just leave it broken.
Just to fuck with them.
And just be see you later.
Yeah, so what happens is he's playing with this kind of black box, and then all of a sudden an engineer comes over and just pushes him out of the way and starts messing with it because a voice comes out of it. And so the engineer just starts kind of messing with it, and all these other engineers are coming over because I think they're kind of genuinely curious about this. And then we get this message from the grave, and it's Admiral Whitcomb. And so basically it's a message saying, hey, this is my Nova bomb. You have a few seconds before you're all dead. And at this point, Quasas realizes, this isn't good. So he goes to run for it. And this thing takes out It destroys a bunch of Covenant ships. It completely destroys a moon nearby. And it's just such, like they say, it's just like in the blink of an eye, everything is just gone. So I thought that was crazy that all like kind of happened. And I was like, yes, Whitcomb came back for just one more badass moment because we finally got to see his bomb go off.
Oh, and I love it because it gives me like two great things that I've loved in Halo novels so far. One, the stupid, silly antics of grunts. Because like they talk about a little bit earlier that Quasas learns to like interpret human language, never learns to write it down or anything because they don't want them to read or do any of that stuff, but it learns the language. And so he just loves that it's like this chirpy box and it's saying stuff.
Oh yeah, he didn't discover it. He had been listening to it for a while.
He was listening to it and like he was listening to the battery was dying. And so that's when the engineers were like, what the fuck are you doing? Like put it back in there, it's dying. Like then them, I think, assembling it all back together went ahead and reactivated it because what did it have? It had like 10 to the power of 10 to a nuke. Basically.
Something like that. It's like one of the biggest things that the UNSC had.
Yeah,
and it's also kind of sad because you see the innocence of grunts, and this is really whenever we get into Conduct Harvest, you'll really see it. Just like it was so sad. It's like this guy's just. It's almost like listening to like a song, and now the song died, and then now he's dead.
It is, and then he had a little story before this that was just like his way to work. He saw some grunts who were like gambling and like he lost some methane, but he like gained an audio recording from Earth. Like they were like collecting audio chips from Earth and there were songs from Earth.
Yeah, he was literally just like a happy-go-lucky grunt with a pretty easy job.
Yeah.
And probably the only time I will call the engineers dickheads, but these dickhead engineers kind of messed everything up. So yeah, that's basically the end of Section 6, Ghosts of Onyx. We see Zaitanja Wadenry for the first time, and his kind of power that he has over the current Covenant faction, or the one that wants to stay with the religion. So it was pretty cool to see him introduced into this. We also see Quasas, who unfortunately met his end at the end. Those were really the key players within this section. And again, I liked this section because I always love the grunts being explored more within the novels, because every time you learn more and more about the grunts, you kind of hate to kill them more and more within the games. Like that kind of unfortunate double
Yeah,
blade
it sucks
sword.
because I have no remorse for it and I love watching them explode, but that's just me.
So let's move on to the final section of this book, Reclaimers.
AKA the most confusing section of this entire book.
It bounces around a lot, and I think some things are open to interpretation. Maybe we're just crazy and didn't pay attention, but here we go.
So we start out seeing the Covenant fleet has found its way to Onyx along with this UNSC fleet. And so this battle forms away, and you have the UNSC actually start to kind of outsmart the Covenant. And they basically dropped some nukes behind them, blew some ships up, and it led it down to only 2 ships. And we have the Prowler Dusk, which we've seen a couple times in the book. It wasn't really described, but basically they're the spy ship that has kind of seen what's been happening.
Yeah, they've been kind of just hiding, and they're just kind of like,
Yeah, they're just reconnaissance. And so they're kind of watching all these events unfold. And you see that, once again, the telltale sign of they're retreating. Why are they retreating?
This isn't good.
They don't retreat. And so they're following these 2 ships away, only to learn that behind the moon, we have another 20 or so that are coming in to do it. And unfortunately, with their firepower, they still are able to destroy all of the UNSC ships, making even more Ghosts of Onyx.
Yeah. And I always love, like, definitely, like, the mix of, like, ground battles and space battles and, like, learning more about tactics. I know there are a lot of people who really appreciate kind of that part of these Halo stories. So then it moves on to, we're back on Onyx. And everyone who's surviving right now, we have Spartan IIIs, we have the Spartan IIs, and then we have like Halsey and Mendez. And they're all making their way to the Zone 67, like the forbidden area that they talked about. And we start to realize like this is like, and then they find that Forerunner city, which I think is crazy that it's kind of like, well, that's why that was gated off.
Well, and that's why we figure out, mean, this is the first time we even see that there's a Forerunner city.
Yeah, we've only ever seen like structures.
Yeah, we've only seen the structures specifically in the Halo or from some dig sites that we've had. But this is a full-blown city that's still functioning, obviously. It's producing Sentinels, and we'll learn.
Yeah, it's kind of like a factory.
It's like a factory. We learn that they're actually producing the Sentinels one every 6 seconds.
Yeah, something crazy. Like it just like there's no way they can take them out as fast as they're being created.
Yeah, and yeah, so they take their Covenant dropship that they had from the crashed ship that they brought in, and they fly it through. And they keep saying, it's big enough to fly dropships through. It's really awesome. And this whole section is really where you get the sci-fi-ness of Halo. And it is confusing.
Yeah, I mean there's a few like crazy things going on. I know that we start to learn that this planet is not really a planet. It's a shield world, quote unquote. And that's one reason why Halsey actually wanted to come here, because she saw it was called a shield world. So she's like, she thinks like, I can bring the Spartans here and we can be protected, because she with what we saw in First Strike, she's going through like this moral dilemma of like, I want to save my Spartans. These are my Spartans, like, and we don't know this anymore, but at the time, like, these are like my children. Like, I need to protect them. And so we start to see more and more of these kind of real motives. Because I know at one point she was telling them about a hidden cache of Forerunner technology they could use, and that's why they were making their way there. And we start to discover, like, that was a lie. And we kind of see, she's kind of a shady character, and she's kind of manipulating people and bending, what they should be doing for more of her own objective.
Well, precisely. And as we go through this, Forerunner city, we start to see so many different dichotomies of it and the factory element of it. And we didn't touch on it earlier, but after winter, they now got Endless Summer. And Endless Summer was kind of telling them, like, through single beam communication, like, we need to shut this down. We need to shut down this facility and stop that. And so they make their way through, and they realize that there's temporal rifts because there's teleportation things which actually take you through slip space, but it takes you from slip space to another part of the facility, and
it's fun.
It's interesting. And so they get there, they're able to disable the facility and basically take that all down, which is lost on me. I will fully say that.
Don't they find those pods too?
So that's another section they figure out, is they figure out that another portion of the Gamma Company is still alive.
Yeah, it's Katana.
Yeah, it's Katana.
They find Katana in these kind of pods, and after a while of Halsey examining it, she's like, and even like you can see, like, it's almost like Nylund is purposely making this confusing, because it's like Halsey's like, oh, they're not here. And
everyone's like, yeah, they are. They're in cryopods.
And then she's like, well, okay, they are here, but they're not here. Because at one point she tells Linda, point your sniper rifle scope at one of the Spartans in Katana and tell me how far away it is. And it says it's infinitely far away. And Linda's like, oh, this scope is messed up. And she's like, nope, it's perfectly fine. So they're trapped within, they were captured by Sentinels, and they're kind of trapped in this weird endless space-time pod.
Yeah, so it's slip space, but it is a subset of slip space.
It's so fun.
And they kind of talked a little bit about this when we're talking about transmissions and things, some making it through, some getting lost. So those possibly went to a different subset of slip space.
Yeah.
And things along those lines. So no one else except for Halsey, because obviously she's the cocky, smart one, can wrap their head around this. But they do realize that those pods are movable.
Yeah.
And they're meant to be moved, is what they say.
Yeah. And so at this point, they're trying to make their way towards the core, because they need to make their way. And I think I said that Onyx was a shield world, but really that was my mistake, is that the core of Onyx will lead to a shield world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my timeline might be a little off, with all this slip space talk, you know what I'm saying? But at one point, it's either for you guys, I'm sorry about this, but it's either before or after they find those pods, because I know that they discover them, and because Halsey pulls up a map when they're on basically the teleporter, but Voro sends an initial wave in, and they discover that same entrance, because they had realized they're trying to ping the planet and figure out where the sequence is coming from, because they are sending out this holy message, and they realize it's from this central point where these Sentinels are coming from. So they fly in, And previously, you had some of Gamma Company and some of Blue Team rig up C4, and they detonated when they come in, and a battle ensues. And unfortunately, through everything, this is one of my favorite kind of graphic moments too, is the battle rages on, we have a ground battle, and they eventually make their way, because they originally had Mendez and the others were guarding the ship. And so in this kerfuffle, as they try and make their way out and they try and make their way away from the Covenant, they realize Dante gets over to them. He's like, yeah, I think I got hit. And he falls.
Yeah, and you realize like his stomach is just opened up, like he was just torn to shreds.
Yeah, it was such a graphic description. Like his ribs were showing, and like had no all his blood loss. There was just needles all inside of him, and you realize later that Kurt finally allows Halsey to understand what he did to the Spartans, and why.
She's curious about the Spartan IIIs. Is something we haven't really touched on. She's kind of like really, really curious, and she's asking them a little bit of questions, and they're asking her, and she's wanting to learn, and she's kind of in this stalemate with Kurt, and he's like, I can't tell you this information. She's like, well, I'm not going to cooperate with you then. So he has to tell him like, okay, listen, these are the drugs I gave to them so they can survive, and she starts to understand like, I get it. Like I'm in the same boat. I cared about you guys. Like, so you see once again, like he is kind of at this parallel with Halsey where he understands how she feels seeing all these people he cares for so much just dying in front of him.
Yeah. And this is kind of our last kind of heart to heart until we have our final battle. And so they take the teleporter, and it takes them to what they think is a snow world, and they think they're outside, but they realize they have walls around them. And you have, I like that, like Mendez puts on these wraparound ancient metal things, and sunglasses.
I had to I went back like when I heard that I was like, those are sunglasses.
Yeah.
Come on.
And then like all the Spartans, dim them and put on basically they're on their visors and everything like that. And they then start to see these motion. And they realize that the Covenant's here, and it's a full force. And this is where, the battle, which is kind of what everyone looks forward to in a lot of these things, like the huge Nylund battle that happens. And you have stuff like Blue Team is just mowing stuff down, using all their ammo. There's grunts trying to set up mortars, and they're going down.
And like suicide grunts too, running at them and everything.
And elites are falling, all this stuff's falling, and they're realizing they're getting low. But then you have a hunter pair come in,
and that's when shit kind of really starts to hit the fan, because we also learned that there's 3 pairs total.
Yes,
so there are 6 hunters, and I think at one point Voro says like, we're ready to go, and he sees that they're like excited, so they're ready to go after them. And this is when shit's really hitting the fan, and it's kind of just going balls to the wall combat. And that's when the hunter pair, they fire at them, right?
So you have Linda fell. She was in this battle, and she falls, and you have both hunters got fuel rod cannons lasered on her position and around them, and they fire, and Holly actually jumps in front of it.
Yeah, so we're seeing these Spartan III sacrificing their lives for Spartan IIs, people they don't know at all.
And they just know that it's part of the mission. She jumps in, and she actually gets vaporized pretty much from what they said. There's really not much left.
She's done.
Yeah, she's done. And so it blows everybody else back, but they're startled, and they're trying to get up. And then you have these hunters that are pretty much winning at this. And so they're all stunned. And so Kurt, who's like, this is my team, I need to do this, charges at a hunter, ready to shoot him, but then doesn't realize how fast the hunter can whip around and whips
yeah, because he comes down and kind of gives him like a hammer fist, almost like straight into his chest. And it's like solar plex, right?
Yeah, because and they also talk like he was still wearing the spy suit. So spy suit armor breaks, cracks, and all like the internal gel and everything just fails out.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm kind of lucky to still be here. But his cracked ribs, he's bleeding, and he's like seeing double and just can't handle it. So he's got like this pretty much fatal injury at this point that we're going to kind of learn about.
And this is where Will comes in, right?
Yeah, Will comes in and tackles him.
Yeah.
Tackles him down a hill.
You got to think, it's like hunters are tall, like big. So you have one man, Spartan or not, tackle these 2 hunters, and then when Kurt goes to look, like, and I think they say everyone is stunned that he's taking on 2 hunters hand to hand.
He's actually taking on all 6, because that's where the other 4 are down there. So he's taking on these 6 hunters, and all the elites stop, and they're just stunned, and they're like, there's one Spartan against all of these, and like they were stunned. So at that same time, all of Kurt's team is over the hill, opening up on them.
Yeah, I just loved, like, because, you know, you, like, read or hear this and you, like, visualize it in your head. You're just like, holy shit, this is absolutely incredible. Like, to see, like, this, like, visually, like, when you, like, just imagine and, like, you see that, quote, impossibility that Spartans can perform during something like this.
And this is one thing I would love to see on screen, because when you have Will down there and he's duking it out with this hunter, Linda puts a shot straight through the hunter's stomach and it doesn't do anything. But then he raises his shield arm and Will actually goes in tighter and just like starts duking it out in his stomach and actually ripping out all of like
worms,
the worms and the eels of it and like just tearing them down. And then unfortunately, eventually gets overcome by the hunters and just gets shot, and his armor melts and just everything melts, and he's just done for.
Yeah, so now we've lost 3 Spartans that we've gotten to know within this, 2 Spartan IIIs and 1 Spartan II, and all of them went out fighting. It wasn't just like this unfortunate circumstance, you know, it's like they went down fighting because they knew what their fate was going to be. So at this point, they kind of think they've won kind of like the first wave, correct?
Yeah, so once again, the idea of kind of the elites backing off and retreating. And so they're able to actually grab Will up. They still have Dante with them. They brought him with them.
Yeah, they have the bodies.
And they bring the bodies over to a teleporter that Halsey's been working at to try and figure out some coordinate thing she was trying to figure out.
This has been kind of like almost like a mission where you have to defend this asset.
Exactly, exactly. It's a wave defense thing. So the first wave is defeated, and unfortunately,
second wave's coming. We're seeing firefight pretty early on.
Yeah.
Shout out to Eric Nylund.
Eric Nylund discovered firefight. So Voro's here.
Yeah, and this is where we see this line of elites like watching, and we see that they all have jackal shields.
They all have jackal shields,
and they don't want it to, but they know like. And even the Spartans know, like, they only have these, so we'll waste our bullets on the jackal shields because they still have their overshields too.
Yeah, and this is kind of the oh fuck moment, because they look over and they see one gold elite just dawn in this beautiful armor, like over all these other ones that are just...
Well, you think of like that dull purple that they have, and then he's standing at the top, and it's just kind of like, yep, he is on a personal mission, vendetta. Yeah. Like, granted, it was from the Supreme Commander, but you know, this is personal.
Yeah, and
he's out here.
They realize like there's no way they can do this, so they start checking their clips, checking out what they got going on. There's not much, but I believe Halsey then is like, hey, this teleporter thingy's active. We can go to our thing. And
that's when Kurt's kind of like, okay, you guys go. I'm going to arm these Fenris nuclear warheads. They had these, by the way. Forgot to pepper that in, but they had these warheads. And so
they were some of the same ones that they scaled down from earlier in the ship when they brought them with them.
Yeah, and so Kurt's like, okay, I'm going to arm these and then come through. You guys all need to get out of here. So at this point, Kurt promotes Fred. He says, you're in control now. And you see Blue Team are like, listen, we lost you once. We can't do this again. And he's like, guys, it's fine. I'll see you on the other side. Like, it's perfectly fine. And then we see the other Spartan IIIs, all but Tom and Lucy stay for the moment. And then we see Mendez and Halsey. They all go through kind of this portal. And this is the point where Tom and Lucy are like, listen, we know what you're going to do. We're staying with you. And so Kurt's like, okay, you guys are right. You can stay with me. But instantly, Kurt knocks out Tom. And so you see Lucy, she can't talk. So she's like frantically trying to like communicate with him. And he's saying like, listen, you guys survived that mission when you were kids. Like,
you're not dying here.
You're not dying here. There's a reason you survived. You have more to do than just this. And so he forces them on their way.
Yeah, and she tries to speak, and all she can do is cry.
Yeah, like you hear just her like starting to cry. Like, it's not even the point like we do truly learn, like it has nothing to do with her vocal cords or anything. It's like
mental.
Yeah, it's mental. And so all we hear is these whimpers and her start to cry, and he sends them on their way. Yeah. And so, and again, this is like one of those scenes, like you imagine it in your head, and just how like beautiful this whole scene is that he's sending them off because he knows, okay, I'm gonna die here.
Well, it's Kurt's story, like his kind of not rise and fall, but his rise to actually being a leader. Because previously he was never a leader within Blue Team. He was kind of a leader with the kids he was training. Going back a little bit, whenever Fred and Blue Team join him, he's like, "Listen, I know you guys have a mission, from Commander, but I'm ranking officer here and I'm control this planet, so you're under me.
Yeah.
And so Fred says, sir, yes, sir. But they said it was different.
He had no respect.
No
in his
respect
voice.
for him.
Yeah.
And so now, like, you're seeing him earning that. And we learned a little bit before that Hunter crushing him up, like, he's almost dead. So he's actually basically only being held together by biofoam.
Yeah, like that's what he says. Is that like that's all he can really feel. So we see the oncoming, like he's starting to die, and in his last few actions are he's arming these warheads, and he's on this kind of like a tablet, and he's on this comm that he's moving over all the Spartans that died to MIA. That's like one of his final actions is that he's moving those over. And this is where we see Voro walk up. And so Kurt says, like, hey, you have one more fight and it's with me. And it's kind of like Kurt doesn't know if that the elite like knew like his language, but like
you could actually see that like he respected him and like respected him as a fighter.
Yeah, the elite's like, okay, I get it. You have a little bit of fight left in you. Let's do this. And he's like, you're gonna die honorably. And Kurt can understand that through his translator. And this is where he says, die. Don't you know Spartans never die? And he arms the warhead.
Oh, and he turns his palm and he's got the trigger.
And that's it. He goes down. He completely eliminates all of that opposing Covenant force on Onyx.
Yeah, and to go back a little bit, like I said, more sci-fi jargon with this. The reason why he was kind of waiting there and he couldn't just teleport himself was this wasn't just like one of those other weird teleporters there, apparently. Apparently like a portal.
Yeah.
Because he had to like wait till it like winked out of existence before doing anything.
Yeah, it disappeared. And something I forgot to mention is as he's dying, he sees the ghosts of,
it's so cool.
of these fallen Spartan IIIs just standing there. And he was so far gone, he couldn't tell if it was real or not. But
and he said, I don't care.
Yeah, he knew that they were there with him. And that's when he arms the nuke and he goes out. And it's so crazy. This explosion happens. And we saw the Dusk Prowler,
Yes, we go back
out to them, and you start to see the planet change, and they realize, the crew of this Prowler realize, Onyx wasn't a planet. It was one collective structure created by those Sentinels.
Yeah, because they were like, the planet starts to crack and things start to pop out. He's like, are they glassing the planet? They're like, that's not Covenant. There's no plasma heat. That's coming from internal.
Yeah, and it's just like this whole thing was itself just a bunch of Sentinels hooked together. And, it's just like that's kind of the realization of why there are so many, because they can just branch off. They're not only create them quickly, but they can just branch off of sections of the planet to attack anyone that they need to. So now we're inside this kind of the quote shield world where like all of the Spartan IIIs, Blue Team, and Halsey and Mendez went, and they're kind of inside of what was Onyx. They're kind of in this like different, I don't want to say dimension.
It is. It's a different dimension.
Okay. Yeah, and so they have this.
But you're right. It is in the heart of Onyx. But it's the same type of thing with the Katana team.
Yeah,
that they're in slip space, but they're in a subset of slip space within that same area.
And they have Katana team with them. They put them through. So they have a quick memorial for everyone, and it's, this is kind of like a cliffhanger ending, because now the Spartan IIIs are starting to realize that they're part of this team. And so the book ends with Kelly saying the line that we heard at the beginning, which is...
Well, yeah, go back a little bit. So the cliffhanger to start it off with is, they're like, we need to get out of here because we can't just... Because originally Halsey had wanted everyone to stay there. It was like, listen, we have time. Heal your wounds, rest up. Let's get back in the battle when we can. Jesse and I were talking about this, and he brought up that, she's probably doing this, and more than likely just doing this to keep her Spartans safe.
Yeah.
Because that's originally what she wanted.
Yeah, at this point, now this story is explained upon later, but looking at it to the perspective of someone reading this for the first time, like this is kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and you're like, I think that's what it's going to be. And so then we cut over to Blue Team, and I believe it's Linda?
I think it was Kelly.
Was it Kelly? It was Kelly who was thinking, like, do you think John's still alive?
Yeah, that's what they're one because he's the only. He's like they're saying like he's one of the only Spartans left, if not the only Spartan left.
Yeah, and they're like, no doubt, like he's got this. And they're like, because they're like he's the only one that can do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then at that point, the Spartan IIIs are wondering what's happening to them, but then they kind of learn of where they rank within the Spartan IIs.
Yeah, and so that's when Kelly goes over, and and they even talk about this a little bit in the book. If Spartans clasp another Spartan on the shoulder, like that's the most endearing sign of affection that they show. And so like Kelly does that, and it's like, you guys proved yourselves, like, because they even talk about before when they're kind of talking about them, they're like, so what do you think, of the Spartan IIIs? Like, they're just kids. And it's like, we were once just kids. And I said, they're Spartans. And that's when, she walks over, she goes, welcome to Blue, Spartans. We're going to make a great team.
And that's it. That's Ghosts of Onyx.
Boom. You start with that quote up, you end with that quote. It's beautiful.
It was great. So, within this section, we saw this whole story come to an end. We saw Will and Holly die. We also saw Dante die. And then most importantly, we see Kurt die. But he takes out everyone with him. He goes down fighting. And I think really, this book really, I think, as of right now, this is truly one of the more emotional ones. I mean, this really made me like sad and like tear up reading this. Like,
oh man, the end, like Kurt's arc is so cool.
Seeing the ghosts too. That's what really just like, and it's just like sad to talk about. Now, I said I teared up the first time I actually every time I've ever read or listened to this. It's just, it sucks to see a guy who's fighting because he thinks he's doing, or he's doing what he thinks is right, and he's just seeing hundreds of kids that he cares about die, and finally seeing those ghosts staring back at him, and he just goes down for them, basically. I think that's one reason why they appear, and those are some of the ghosts that are talked about on the Ghosts of Onyx.
Yeah, and to give you guys just a big recap on some of the most important points from this book, one, we see Spartan IIIs.
Yep.
So we now see that in the lore, and that's going to come out with it and kind of expand as we continue on.
Yeah.
We see the Great Schism really take effect in this, outside of, the games themselves.
It's kind of like they looked at more as to like it's all these like little factions that are starting to break off, and like how the brutes and the elites are battling each other.
Exactly. And then we see that, not only are there constructs, but there's quote unquote whole worlds of these Sentinels made out of Sentinels.
Yeah.
But that are a production facility to honor, those who could be reclaimers as they come.
And we start to really see the depth of the Forerunners' technology more than we already thought. We could, like the fact that they have like these subsets of slip space and like these cities and whole planets made out of Sentinels. Like, I think it's really crazy. We also saw, that New Mombasa wasn't the only place that was attacked on Earth. And I think also with Halo Uprising, our next episode, we'll see even more of that too. But overall, like some, crazy events happening, these characters that you care for starting to die. And I think that becomes a very common theme within these these stories. I know Nylund really loved to do that. And I think that's one reason, like, you have all like that. I love Nylund's stories. Like, you have all this crazy sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but he really humanizes a lot of things at the end of it.
It does. And I think really, like you said, seeing so much outside the games, and that's why we do recommend all of this extra media. If you've just played the games, like, you have, I would say, just a single track mind on what the story is, and it's that Chief kill, Chief leave, Chief win.
Yeah.
And
Chief kind of like Cortana.
Yeah. And that's about it. And so getting these, to me, I mean, having grown up playing the games, you obviously get your own emotional toll from all that, but you get so much more emotional attachment to these characters when you can actually get them described to you and feel their emotion and like really get to understand them when they're not just on a screen for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and have 5 lines a game or something like that.
Yeah, precisely.
So let's talk about kind of the reception of this book. Ghosts of Onyx would go on to become New York Times bestseller for 11 weeks and later go on to become an international bestseller. Though many reviewers would bring up grammatical and typographical errors in the book. Eric, as I said, had said, oh, we're going to do a reprint of this and all of that stuff's going to get fixed. And I don't think we've seen that reprint yet. But though, no news of that. This would also be the first book in the Halo franchise not centered around Chief, not told from his perspective. And I think a lot of people were worried about that at first, but it didn't affect the overall reception of the book.
No, because I think for me too, once again, going back to it, Chief is such a one-dimensional character at times where he's just like, I do this is my purpose. And now that you get to see like the humanity of other Spartans, even like Kurt being the human Spartan basically, and understanding that arc is really neat. Yeah,
and so unfortunately, this is the last time we would see a full novel from Eric Nylund. We're going to see him again in Genesis, and we're going to see him do a short story in Halo Evolutions. But as a whole, this is the last time we're going to see a full story from Eric. And I'm still kind of waiting for a return, but I really think one reason for that is the fact that there is some really confusing stuff going on. The story kind of bounces around so much that it kind of makes trying to understand it as a whole with one pass really hard to do. So I think, there was some fault for that. And I think that I can only imagine without Tor Books really coming in to help iron everything out, like how crazier this story would have been. As I said, like Alex and I were talking about this before. Nylund he creates really good stories, but how he tells them is a completely different story. Yeah. He really goes off the deep end sometimes with that. And by all means, I'm not saying this was a bad story or a bad book. I think you really have to, you have to be 100% zoned in, focused on it. But overall, yeah, just I'd say it was still a good book. It just, goes here and there and everywhere. But I'd say as a whole, if I had to rank this book, I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5. Simply because of that sometimes confusing parts and that sci-fi mumbo jumbo. But that's just me. What about you?
I'm on the same boat with it. I mean, I think the scientific part of it is you say sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but the science fiction part of it I think is necessary if you want to advance it than more than just a first-person shooter that has some aliens in it. I thought it was very interesting, the talk of different dimensional slip space and getting to that point. I thought it was good. It was a good book. There was definitely portions of it that once, like I talked about earlier, a little confusing, and I would love to see a visual representation because for me, I couldn't visualize. It was kind of hard, especially at the end when they're like, so it's about 7 meters by 10, and then it's this color, and it's this. I'm like, I can kind of see that, but what is this and this and that? So a little confusing on that aspect, like especially the end of the book. But I thought overall, lore-wise, I mean, it's Spartan IIIs.
Yeah, it told a lot.
It told a lot. I mean, like, if you were just to read one book and be like, oh, that's why there's more Spartan, like, you would kind of start to understand that there's another program out there, that it wasn't just this single program that happened to be there, and why are these other things? Yeah,
well, I think definitely a lot of people were confused why there were Spartan IIIs and Reach.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people didn't read this book. But at the end of the day, I think that was also Bungie's last game. So they're like, screw it. Doesn't matter.
Hey, guess what? 343? Deal with this wrench. No, so it was good. I mean, overall, like I said, very good book. I as far as gaming books go, they've done well. Like I said, I've read a lot of different gaming books. I used to read a lot when I was a kid because I'd play this game, like Brute Force or things like that.
Yeah.
Mass Effect. And these just lived up to it a bit more than I thought it would. So I'm going to give it plenty of stars out of plenty of other stars. Quality book.
Quality book. Yeah, again, great book. We recommend it. I know a lot of people have told us that they've been looking forward to our review of this book, so we hope you liked it because this was a fun episode to record, definitely revisiting these really heart-touching moments. Moving on from that as a whole, our next book is going to be Halo Uprising, our second comic book episode. And I'm pretty excited about that episode as a whole. We just had our third game night this past Saturday, and this game night was a really good one. We discovered a new religion during it.
Yeah, all praise the whale.
Yep, bless the whale.
Bless the Franc.
and hope it returns the blessings. But yeah, if you haven't participated in these game nights, join our Discord. Typically, it's the link in the bio on our Instagram. If not, message us on any social. We'll send it to you.
And we're typically, right now, as far as our schedule goes for Jesse and I, we are every other Saturday evening. It's typically 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to change it up a little bit in the future. We want to include a couple more people who can't necessarily make it, especially our European audience, and then possibly people who have to go to bed a little earlier.
Yep. Yeah, we've been chatting with some European Discord members and really looking forward to playing with them here soon.
So yeah, so we'll get that set, and just pay attention to, if you're already in the Discord, like we give you guys info first, so you'll get that, but also Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we'll have a lot more info on there for you as well.
Yeah, so again, tune in 2 weeks, we'll be checking out Halo Uprising. That's a great comic, tells kind of the story of what happens on Earth in between 2 and 3. And with that, I am your host, Jesse Reiners.
And I'm your host, Alex Kendall.
And thank you for tuning in to Finish the Fight, a Halo podcast.
Halo. It's finished.
No, I think we're just getting started.